No one expected betrayal to come from within the walls of the nursery. But in a palace built on privacy and protocol, a single violation of trust has ignited royal fury. Catherine didn't hesitate. She acted with speed and precision. A nanny, a recording, and the moment everything changed. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. Prince Louis had been raised in the cocoon of royal care, watched over not just by loving parents but by an army of vetted professionals who understood the sacred boundary between service and intrusion. From the moment of his birth, Louis, youngest of the Wales children, was protected with an almost obsessive vigilance, not out of paranoia, but necessity. The spotlight on the monarchy had intensified in recent years, and Catherine, having endured her own trials in the public eye, knew all too well what could be lost if a moment of weakness slipped through the cracks. Yet even that hardened awareness hadn't prepared her for what came next. Whispers began as murmurs, an odd security lapse here, an unexplained presence there. Human error, misremembered schedules, misplaced equipment. But palace security, trained to detect the undetectable, raised the alarm behind closed doors. One of the royal family's most sacred spaces, the nursery, may have been breached. Catherine was informed in confidence. No meetings, no memos, just a single conversation that left her frozen in disbelief. Her first instinct was denial. Surely this was a mistake. But the deeper they looked, the more questions rose. A trusted nanny, adored by the children, began offering contradictory explanations when confronted. Timelines shifted. Accounts didn't align. Surveillance logs showed moments of unexplained access. And worst of all, Prince Louis had started asking questions. Simple ones, but laced with a confusion that hinted at something unseen. That was all it took. For Catherine, this wasn't political. It wasn't institutional. It was maternal. The gates came down instantly. Access was revoked. Staff were reshuffled. An internal lockdown was triggered, not to shield the public from scandal, but to protect a child from something much more corrosive. Betrayal. William, known for his calm under pressure, reportedly reacted with barely contained rage. He had seen what press intrusion and internal disloyalty had done to his mother, and he would not allow history to echo through his children. In that moment, the illusion of security shattered. Not because a stranger had infiltrated the palace, but because someone inside had forgotten what loyalty meant. And now, as the first pieces of truth emerged, Catherine found herself standing on a razor's edge between fury and resolve. But what Catherine uncovered next would shake her to her core and ignite a storm no one saw coming. Tucked behind a shelf in Louis's playroom, the device was small, almost invisible. But what it captured had implications far beyond the nursery. It wasn't just about watching, it was about betrayal. What began as a precautionary sweep by palace security turned into a revelation that shook the very foundation of trust within the royal household. A routine scan of Prince Louis's quarters revealed an anomaly, an object that wasn't listed in the inventory of approved, secured devices. At first, it was dismissed as a child's forgotten toy or a harmless electronic. But when the device was removed and opened, what lay inside silenced the room. A sophisticated, miniature audio recorder, expertly concealed, timed to activate during certain hours of the day during tutoring sessions, bedtime routines, and most disturbingly, moments of private family conversation. Technicians and internal investigators began analyzing the audio files retrieved from the device. What they uncovered wasn't just chatter or idle sound. These were intimate recordings. William's voice, speaking softly to his son. Catherine reading aloud. A brief exchange between the couple about upcoming royal duties, nothing scandalous, but profoundly private. Enough to expose vulnerabilities, enough to be sold, enough to be weaponized. The trail didn't lead to a break-in or cyber intrusion, it led to a personal device. The nanny's encrypted phone, once thought lost during a holiday weekend, was retrieved for review. Its contents had been wiped, but not before traces of metadata digital fingerprints linked her directly to the device in Louis's room. She denied everything. said she didn't know how it got there, claimed it was planted, but her story unraveled quickly, and the inconsistencies were damning. The palace launched a retroactive background investigation. Suddenly, elements of her past that had seemed benign took on a new shape. A gap in employment here, a suspicious reference there, contacts in places with known tabloid connections, even whispers of discreet communications with a freelance journalist now under scrutiny. Was she acting alone? Or had she been placed? Theories flooded the inner sanctum of the firm. Some feared this was a simple case of greed, a betrayal for profit. Others whispered darker possibilities: leverage, blackmail, or a larger campaign to destabilize the family from within. What made it worse was the thought that this didn't happen in the public eye. It happened in a child's sanctuary, in a place where laughter and lullabies should echo, not surveillance. And the damage, while invisible, was irreparable, because in this world, perception was protection. And that protection had just been violated in its most sacred space. Catherine's fury was quiet but absolute. And her next move sent a message to the entire palace. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't delay. Just a private confrontation and a single sentence: "You're done." There were no theatrics, no performance for the press. It wasn't needed. The shockwaves came not from what was said, but from how it was done. Swift, unapologetic, final. The message was crystal clear. There would be no negotiation, no second chances, no damage control. The line had been crossed, and Catherine wasn't going to let it blur again. In a palace known for diplomacy and discretion, her approach was rare and unforgettable. Within hours, the nanny was gone. No formal meeting, no drawn-out HR proceedings, just a quiet meeting behind closed doors, and then a silent departure. Staff who had grown used to the calm rhythms of Kensington were rattled, not because they disagreed, but because they had never seen this side of Catherine so decisively on display. She didn't just speak for herself. She spoke as a mother, as a royal, as a woman unwilling to allow her family's sanctity to be breached without consequence. One senior aide would later admit, off the record, "I've never seen her like that." There was no hesitation, just steel. What shocked many wasn't that the nanny was dismissed, it was how. There was no formal announcement from the palace, no press briefing, no dignified exit cloaked in vague language. The only confirmation came from a well-placed insider who leaked a 6-word phrase that made headlines worldwide. Catherine said, "You're done. That's it." It wasn't a scandal Catherine wanted the public to consume, it was a message she wanted the palace to absorb. The era of passive tolerance had ended, and the line between the private and the public had been redrawn in bold ink. William, known for his calm and measured temperament, stood firmly behind his wife, not as a bystander, but as a co-defender. This wasn't just about one child. It was about the family, the institution, the future of trust inside the monarchy's most vulnerable walls. For years, Catherine had played the role of nurturer, diplomat, and modernizer. But now, something had shifted. She was no longer just a figure of compassion, she had become a figure of command. And those watching behind palace walls understood. This wasn't a one-off reaction. It was the beginning of a policy. Behind the scenes, palace protocol began to change. Vetting tightened, internal review processes accelerated. Conversations around child privacy and staff conduct turned from polite discussions to strategic overhauls. Catherine's actions hadn't just removed a single individual, they had triggered a full recalibration of power within her household, a reminder that kindness does not equal weakness, and that even within a centuries-old monarchy, quiet authority can roar louder than any public decree. But even as the nanny exited, escorted and silent, the ripple effects had only just begun. One firing exposed many fears. Who else had access? What else was recorded? As investigators combed through data and footage, the monarchy faced its most invasive security breach in years. What had begun as an isolated act of betrayal quickly mutated into a storm of suspicion. Panic didn't erupt outwardly, but it pulsed beneath every polished surface of the royal estate. Within hours of the nanny's removal, emergency protocols triggered across all royal residences. Bedrooms, nurseries, private sitting rooms, even vehicles were swept for signs of hidden devices. Security teams worked around the clock, turning once trusted spaces into crime scenes. Each room cleared brought momentary relief, but no peace, because the question lingered in the shadows. What if this wasn't the only one? Kensington Palace, normally quiet in its internal rhythms, became a fortress under siege, not by outsiders, but by uncertainty. As digital forensic experts retraced the data trail, fears escalated. Could there be more recordings stored off-site? Could sensitive footage already be in the wrong hands? The idea that someone, anyone, had listened in on conversations meant for no ears outside the family shattered the illusion of royal invincibility. Catherine's silence grew sharper. William's schedule cleared. The walls seemed to narrow around the family, and behind closed doors, priorities shifted from ceremony to survival. PR teams scrambled. Behind the public calm, they drafted dozens of contingency plans, some never to see the light of day. What if a clip was leaked? What if footage surfaced online? What if a private moment, however innocent, was twisted beyond recognition by tabloids hungry for scandal? They weren't preparing for damage control. They were preparing for a war of narrative, because perception wasn't just a luxury anymore, it was protection. Meanwhile, inside the palace, the atmosphere turned cold, not toward the children, but toward one another. Tensions spiked among the household staff. Whispered questions turned to accusatory glances. Who had known? Who had seen something and stayed silent? One betrayal had fractured the trust that held the royal machinery together, and no loyalty could be assumed anymore. Backgrounds were quietly re-reviewed, contracts were tightened, even senior aides felt the walls closing in, and in the absence of answers, fear became the dominant force. The legal team was brought in discreetly, but their presence was unmistakable. Confidentiality clauses were reinforced. Digital access to sensitive areas was revoked. Warnings were delivered not through anger, but through silence and paperwork. The message was clear. This was no longer a personnel issue. It was a legal and institutional threat, and the family would do whatever it took to defend itself. Behind the scenes, old comparisons surfaced, moments of betrayal from decades past. Whispers of tapes, letters, spies. The monarchy had survived many things, but this was different. Because it wasn't about the past, it was about the future, and the children now under its fragile care. But this wasn't just a story of surveillance. It was about power and who had the right to protect the next generation of royalty. Behind closed doors, William made a quiet but seismic declaration. No one touches my son's world and walks away without consequences. The crown may be his future, but family comes first. In that moment, the ceremonial weight of monarchy took a backseat to something far more visceral: fatherhood, protection, boundaries. And in the hours that followed, William did not rely on aides or rehearsed statements. He demanded a private meeting with his most senior staff, without pomp, without protocol. It wasn't about optics anymore. It was about control. About reclaiming the sanctity of the one space the royal machine should never violate his children's peace. The meeting was short, but the mood was volcanic beneath the surface. For years, William had balanced two realities: the institution and the individual. But now, the lines had been crossed, and his voice, calm but absolute, left no room for debate. Every domestic staff member's clearance was to be re-evaluated. Not out of vengeance, but necessity. Not just nannies and assistants, but cleaners, drivers, even long-standing members of trusted circles. The goal wasn't to punish, it was to reset. The rules had changed. The palace walls echoed with a new kind of order, a protective one. Private security was quietly reassigned, with specific teams designated solely to the children's quarters. Shifts were doubled. Logs were triple-checked. No one entered or exited those zones without recorded approval. And while the public was left in the dark, inside the palace, The message was clear. The days of passive oversight were over. The Wales household would no longer tolerate ambiguity, but William didn't act alone. After the dust of the confrontation had begun to settle, he did something rare. He reached out to Princess Anne, the one royal who had seen the cost of loyalty tested again and again. In quiet conversation, away from cameras and titles, William asked her the question no prince should have to ask. How do you lead when those closest to you can't be trusted? Anne, ever the stoic, offered only a short answer, but it was enough to strengthen his resolve. Loyalty, she said, isn't given in the palace. It's proven, sometimes through silence, sometimes through war. That meeting sparked a shift that was more than operational, it was cultural. The Wales household was no longer just a family, it became a line in the sand. From that moment on, Catherine and William would not simply navigate royal life, they would defend their domain. Behind their smiles, behind the ceremonial roles, a deeper principle took root. The idea that tradition means nothing if it cannot first protect its youngest. William didn't speak to the press. He didn't need to. His actions were his message, and everyone inside that palace felt it. But while the royal couple tightened their circle, the outside world was starting to ask questions, and they wouldn't stop until they had answers. It started with a single line in a tabloid. Security incident inside Kensington nursery. Within hours, it was global. Speculation, outrage, conspiracy. And once again, the monarchy stood exposed. What began as a tightly contained internal matter detonated across the public sphere with ferocious speed. The headline was vague, but it carried a voltage the press couldn't resist. Something had happened behind palace walls, something involving Prince Louis. And in an era fueled by suspicion, that was all it took. Social media ignited. News anchors went live with red banners. Royal commentators were woken up in the middle of the night. The question wasn't just what happened, it was who let it happen. The public's response was swift and divided. Some voices rose in support of Catherine and William, arguing that this breach was an act of vile betrayal against an innocent child. Others, more cynical, turned their ire toward the palace itself, accusing the monarchy of burying yet another scandal. The narrative fractured into factions. Was this a lone actor, a staff failure, or something the firm hoped to quietly clean up before the press caught wind? As silence stretched from Kensington Palace, the speculation only grew more venomous. By mid-morning, the media had a new obsession, the nanny. Who was she? Where was she now? Why hadn't the palace named her? Paparazzi circled former royal residences, desperate for a photograph or a statement. Blogs and anonymous sources claimed to know her name. Others alleged she had already left the country. Every hour brought a new rumor. Was she paid off? Was there a deeper connection? And most disturbingly was the information she recorded already in the hands of outsiders. Inside the palace, panic met protocol. The royal PR machine was thrust into overdrive. Damage control meetings ran late into the night. Briefing documents were shredded and rewritten by the hour. A careful, curated statement was drafted, then pulled. The family didn't want spin. They wanted safety. But the longer they waited, the more the world filled in the blanks for them. Wild theories began to overtake headlines. Nanny blackmailed palace? Was this an inside job? Betraying baby Louis? A royal scandal. And beneath each headline, the same unsettling truth pulsed: if someone could get that close to Prince Louis. What else was vulnerable? For Catherine and William, the noise outside the gates grew deafening, but they refused to respond out of fear. This was no longer about silencing tabloids, it was about reclaiming trust. Every leak, every whisper, every hashtag threatened to undermine the very foundation they had spent years building. A family image built on dignity, unity, and protection. Now that image had been cracked open for the world to see, and everyone was watching how they would respond. The fire was still raging, but amidst the chaos, a new kind of calm was forming. In the chaos of public outrage, one figure emerged stronger, calmer, and more resolute than ever before, Catherine. She didn't play the victim. She didn't hide behind press releases. Catherine stepped forward, not with anger, but clarity. We protect our children, always. And with that, she turned pain into power. Those few words cut through the noise that had consumed the monarchy for days. They weren't shouted. They weren't dramatic. They were steady, certain. And in that moment, something shifted. What had begun as a security breach transformed into a declaration of principle. Catherine did not explain. She did not justify. She simply drew a line. And the world seemed to hold its breath as she stood on one side of it. Unmovable, her remarks came during a previously scheduled child advocacy engagement, but no one in the room mistook their meaning. Without naming the incident, she spoke of trust shattered, of the sacred duty of care, of the unbreakable promise between a parent and a child. Each phrase carried the weight of recent days. Each sentence felt like a quiet reckoning. The audience listened in silence, sensing that this was not just about policy or programs. This was personal. This was a mother speaking from the core of something fierce and unyielding, and when she finished, the response was immediate. Applause swelled, not polite or reserved, but raw and emotional. Outside those walls, the reaction exploded. Within hours, numbers stand with Catherine surged across platforms, fueled by parents, supporters, and even longtime royal skeptics who found themselves moved by her composure and resolve. For 48 hours, her name dominated headlines not as a symbol of scandal, but as a figure of strength. Commentators spoke of a new tone. Analysts pointed to a subtle power shift. Even critics acknowledged that Catherine had seized control of the narrative, not by fighting the storm, but by rising above it. Inside the palace, however, the atmosphere was far more complicated. An insider later revealed that Queen Camilla had quietly urged Catherine to remain silent, to let the palace machinery smooth the crisis over. Catherine refused. Not out of defiance, but out of conviction. She understood something fundamental. Silence would look like surrender, and surrender was not an option, not when her child's safety had been breached, not when trust had been violated in the most intimate of spaces. By speaking, she wasn't escalating the crisis, she was ending it on her terms. From that day forward, Catherine was no longer seen only as the gracious future queen consort. She was recognized as something else entirely, a protector, a leader, a woman willing to shoulder the weight of the crown's expectations while drawing firm boundaries around her family. Palace observers whispered that her influence had deepened overnight. Her presence at internal meetings carried new authority. Her voice was no longer just respected, it was decisive. Yet even as the public storm began to calm, even as headlines softened and the palace slowly exhaled, those closest to the situation knew the real story was far from over. Because what Catherine had done was more than respond to a crisis. She had changed the rules of engagement. And inside the palace, where loyalties, power, and secrets intertwine, that change would echo for a long time to come. But even as the storm began to quiet, deeper concerns were swirling beneath the surface, especially inside the palace. Was she just a lone opportunist, or was there something more? As analysts examined connections, a chilling possibility emerged. This wasn't just about money. It might have been a test. What started as a singular violation inside the royal nursery had begun to morph into something far more calculated, deliberate, and strategic. Investigators retraced the nanny's steps, not just in the palace corridors, but online, in financial records, and through every encrypted trail she left behind. What they uncovered wasn't just negligence or greed. It was something darker. Transactions flagged for unusual routing. Communication logs buried under layers of anonymized proxies. And an eerie pattern in her browsing history. A steady intake of anti-monarchy material, forums, message boards, and podcasts with rhetoric that echoed one message: undermine from within. Her digital fingerprint revealed more than distraction. It revealed alignment. She hadn't just stumbled into ideology. She had absorbed it, engaged with it, and, possibly, offered something in return. The notion that a rogue staffer could orchestrate such a precise breach already unsettled royal aides. But what began to surface next sent an even deeper chill through the institution. There were drafts unsent, encrypted emails addressed to foreign media outlets, some known for publishing leaks, others rumoured to pay handsomely for exclusive footage, especially when it came from inside palace walls. One file, only partially recovered, had a timestamp that matched the day the audio device was first activated. Its file name was simple: proof. It was no longer paranoia. It was probability. Was this woman acting alone? Or had she been placed there, her resume carefully tailored, her demeanour disarmingly calm, her loyalty never fully examined? Theories took shape in the shadows of Westminster. Some speculated it was ideological, others feared foreign influence. A few quietly wondered if it was meant to expose vulnerabilities in the monarchy's most sacred space, not for public consumption, but for private leverage. A test run, some called it. A trial balloon. And if so, then who was waiting to launch the real strike? Pressure mounted in places the public could not see. Behind Parliament doors, whispers turned into questions. How secure was the royal household? How deeply were staff vetted? Had complacency crept in during the modernising wave? One senior MP reportedly asked, "If they can reach Prince Louis's room, what else is within reach?" Questions that previously would have been dismissed as tabloid bait were now voiced in hushed urgency. The institution, built on silence and protocol, found itself staring into the teeth of a breach that made neither relevant. King Charles, already under pressure from internal factions and public scrutiny, faced renewed calls to re-evaluate the security standards of the entire royal apparatus. But this time, it wasn't just about security. It was about ideology, infiltration, and the illusion of control. The idea that someone could pass through the gates, blend into the fabric of the palace, and leave behind a digital trail of betrayal, it didn't just threaten the safety of a child, it shook the foundation of legacy. And through it all, the one question remained: how much more had already been seen, and by whom? What began as a silent betrayal became a loud reckoning. The nursery scandal didn't break Catherine, it revealed her. And in the aftermath, a new chapter for the royal family quietly began. Not with grand speeches or carefully coordinated appearances, but with subtle shifts behind palace doors. Where once she stood as a symbol of grace and tradition, Catherine now moved as a force of resolve, quiet, clear-eyed, and determined. The days that followed the firing of the Nanny were not marked by chaos, but by calm decisions. Calculated steps. In rooms where whispers once held power, now there was only silence and her authority ringing through it. Internally, the Crown credited her with the decisive handling of the crisis, not for a performance, but for action. There were no long delays, no endless inquiries. Catherine had acted swiftly, and the monarchy had followed her lead. Staff roles were quietly reassessed, layers of oversight restructured. The old system, the one built on inherited trust and generational loyalty, was no longer enough. William stood shoulder to shoulder with her, but it was clear. This movement bore Catherine's signature, and in doing so, the Wales household didn't retreat, they redefined themselves. The vetting of domestic staff underwent its most rigorous overhaul in decades. Background checks were intensified, lines of access were redrawn. No longer would proximity to the children be a matter of status or history. It would be earned or denied. The message was unspoken but unmistakable. Their children were no longer symbols to be protected from afar. They were the line, the future, and their protection now came with an entirely different energy. Public appearances subtly changed, less staged, more guarded, still warm, but sharpened. A reminder that while the world may watch, not everything would be open to it. Catherine didn't hide from the cameras. She didn't shrink from the headlines. But what the public began to feel was something different. She wasn't just the Princess of Wales anymore. She was becoming something larger, steadier, a matriarchal figure of the future, a protector. Within the palace, Former aides were dismissed under new, unannounced guidelines. Their exits weren't broadcast. There were no scandalous briefings, no tabloid trails. Just a quiet reshaping of who would stand near the royal children and who would not. Those who stayed understood the shift. The Wales household was no longer managed. It was led. And behind that leadership stood not just a mother, but a woman who had faced betrayal in the most intimate space imaginable and responded not with rage, but clarity. Because Catherine understood something vital. In the monarchy, forgetting is dangerous. Forgiveness may come, but forgetting does not. They say the crown doesn't forget, and neither does a mother. What began as one woman's quiet dismissal had turned into a larger message. Not just to the staff, or to the palace, or to the press, but to anyone watching. Catherine would protect her children, and she would not ask for permission. Because inside these walls, betrayal doesn't echo, it roars. And for Catherine, silence is no longer an option. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in the next one.